everyone, welcome to Lexan TV. We've got a new episode coming your way today, and I'll be chatting with Mr. Herman Hall. Mr. Hall is a son of the soil, and he is also a journalist and author. Years ago, he released his first book on Julian Fédon called Belvedere Estate, and this time around, he's got another one. This one is Julian Fedor, Revolutionary, Patriot and Insurrectionist, The Untold Story of a Mulatto Leader. This book is quite interesting, and for those of you who, are pretty intrigued with historical facts, especially based on figures such as Julian Fedor, this one is going to be a pretty interesting read as well. Here's my conversation with Mr. Herman Hall right now. It's been since 2016, I believe, our last conversation would
that is correct.
Have happened. Yes, Mr. Herman Hall is here with me. He is a gentleman who, like myself, wears many, many hats. Mr. Hall, welcome to Lexan TV.
Right, good morning. And although it has been since 2016, that does not mean I have not been following you.
Thank you.
All your shows.
Thank you so much. You're here to talk about another exciting book release. You are a son of the soil, and more so, a son of Guelph St. John?
Well, a son of Belvedere Estate.
Belvedere Estate.
But I went to the school in Guelph, the Anglican school in Guelph. Yes, I'm a son of Guelph because my Guelph friends who I went to school with, they all associated me with Guelph. Now, I went to Guelph in 1952. And I was in London just a few weeks ago promoting Julian Fedor, Patriot, Sectionist, and so forth. And it was in the midst of the jubilation of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And I was telling people about the coronation in 1950, when school children all over the colony of Grenada and across the British Empire had to celebrate this queen. I mean, I think it was 2 or 3 days of holiday in Grenada. That was 1953. I remember when her father died, the bell rang on Belvedere Estate, which incidentally was once owned by Julian Fedor, and all the leaders came back. I was about 6 years or 7 years wondering what happened, to be told by the manager who came from Guelph Estate to say that King George had died. So that was 52, but then Her Majesty, the Queen, she said that she would prefer to be crowned in 1953, since it would have been celebration. So the 1953 celebration is much in my mind, and I'm sure there are people of my age in Grenada who may recall there were children, their parents couldn't even buy breakfast or lunch or dinner for them, but the governor had decreed that we all have to have our little red, white, and blue clothing, belts, red, white, and blue socks, khaki pants, white shorts. I guess for the young ladies, the same thing. And it was all, But again, Julian Fedor, I was born on his estate and grew up on his estate, and even went to learn my ABC in his house. You can actually
see. His house.
Which I
Herman, you're a little boy during that period, and I'm curious to find out, after you discover all of these facts, what sort of effect did that have on you?
Well, from the beginning, I think in the very first book on Julian Fedor, the one we launched, it was called Belvedere Estate, Fedor's Home. I described that when I was about 3 or 4, if you ask me what of the first 5 things, if I was to list the 5 things I remember, my first memory as a 3-4-year-old, Julian Fedor will rank maybe number 2 or number 3. I thought the man was still living, even though he disappeared in 1796, because the laborers of Belvedere Estate, which is in the mountains of St. John's, they all spoke of Julian Fedor. So I thought this man had just died or was living, and I was about 3 or 4 years old, and I learned my ABC there. So you could practically say I grew up learning about this Julian Fedor from the illiterate laborers of Belvedere Estate.
What was really that factor that pushed you even more to
Well,
to publish these books?
okay. Well, first, it was an obligation I felt to the laborers of Belvedere Estate. We have to remember, these were people in the 1950s. I was 5, 6 years old, okay, since I was born in 45. But these people couldn't read and write. I mean, estate life in Grenada was no better than the days of slavery, slightly better in the 1950s until a man named Eric Gary revolutionized estate life in Grenada in the early 50s. So these people, these laborers spoke of Julian Fedor, and they challenged me. I was fortunately the only person, the only child in Belvedere Estate to have had that fortune to attend the GBSS, the Grenada Boys Secondary School. And the laborers, I remember Mr. Lehman, all of these people have departed, challenging me that when I grow up, they would love for me to write about Julian Fedor because it was hearsay. So that was one. And the second factor, when I taught at the St. John's Christian Secondary School, which I'm frightened to talk about because I am one of the founding teachers. When I say founding teachers, the school was created by American missionaries, Reverend Shaper and his, but I was the original local Grenadian teacher. And all original teachers have since departed, except me. So I just want anyone to, I do not wish to depart that soon. So
not at all.
but that school, when we started in 65, at that particular time in Grenada's history, the established churches and the established schools, they did not want any American missionaries to come to Grenada to start give, number one, the American brand of religion in terms of holiness and so forth, spiritual baptism. And then the British system in the minds of Grenada, the educational system was the best in the world. And as a matter of fact, there were 1 or 2 students from Grenada who went to the United States to get their BA. And when they came back to teach in Grenada, they were given a lower salary because they felt that the bachelor's was not equivalent to the British system. So given all of that, the first year we had no recognition at the Schaefer School, as we say. So we thought we should have speech night, even though we had no graduates. We only was in business for about 2 years, but we started at the ending of the year, so we should have what we call speech night in Grenada. So people asked me, what should we do? And I said, well, you know, we do Shakespeare and Milton as we used to do in GBS's high school presentation. She said, Mr. Hall, I'm sorry, you know, I'm disappointed in you. You have so much local history. Why don't you do something about Julian Fedor? And so I wrote the first play, and the first play on Julian Fedor was actually done at the St. John's Christian Secondary School. I think in 1966, H.A. Blaze was the premier. Grenada was not even yet associated state. And Mr. Blaze, the premier, was the chief minister at that time, was so impressed. He said, from now on, this school is going to get funding from the government. But it was not only the play, the Hallelujah chorus was performed. And people was marveled. They have never heard the Hallelujah chorus, you know, rendered in such a way. So that was one. And then a factor, perhaps a gentleman named, a priest named Father Raymond Divas. Now, most Christians would not know who I'm talking about. Father Raymond Divas was a Roman Catholic priest born in England. And I think he was born in 1885. He came to Grenada in the 1920s. And he's the original Grenadian historian. Apart from writing about the history of Grenada and the Federal Revolution, the history of the Roman Catholic Church, he also wrote about birds of St. Vincent and Trinidad and Grenada. And since I was like 4 years old, Father Divas was coming to Belvedere. So you to learn about, I guess, chat, because again, in those days you walk. So this priest used to walk from Birch Grove, maybe on his bicycle, sometimes ride to Guam. And then when I became of age as a teenager, there was Father Divas still writing books. And he was very impressed with my little thoughts on Grenada history, and he encouraged me. So these are some of the factors that led me to write those 2 books on Julian Fedor.
Wow, that is, and then the birth of a journalist, because you're speaking about yourself being a young boy and loving to write.
The man I grew up with, he was one of the few people who knew how to read and write on the estate, and he read things. So even though the papers came from England a year later, he'd arrive maybe on the read. And in his little, in old time Grenada, there was a little cabinet most people have. They hide the most valuable stuff in the country in Grenada pot. The little glass, the little saucer, the little document. And when they go away, when I was about 5 years old, I would peep through. And there was this book by Father Davis. I couldn't read and write. It was a green book, the original book by Father Davis. So all of those factors have influenced. Yes. Most important though, Grenada, when I speak to Jamaicans, especially, they are so marveled at Grenada's rich history, whether it is good or bad. You know, they never heard of Fedor's rebellion, and they want to know why the country has such great history, and they never heard about it. But you have to remember that, take the Maroons. We grew up thinking the only people who were Maroons were in Jamaica, whereas that on the cover of the new issue of the book, of the new edition of the book, the black guy on the cover of the book is really a Maroon. To be more politically correct, he's what we call a runaway slave or self-emancipated slave. Grenada had several hundreds of self-emancipated slave Maroons.
A lot of people probably know about Everybody's Magazine, and some probably never heard of it. I was so happy and privileged to learn all about it during our first conversation again in 2016. But that was dated back, but you started that magazine in the 70s, correct?
Yeah, 1977. It is one
77.
It is one of the oldest of Black magazines or African-American magazines or minority magazines in the United States.
Wow. And it's still going strong.
Well, yes, I don't know about strong, but it is still going because
it's still going.
The technology has changed. We are in the world of, so we are actually, a new website is about to go up. I'm hoping for a new generation to take over the magazine. But great magazines like Ebony, Jet, most of the magazines, you know, have fell by the wayside.
Yeah.
And I started it in 1977 because I was one of the original founders of the modern day carnival in Brooklyn.
That's right.
Started since in the 1930s in Harlem, but making the carnival what it is today, attracting 1.1 million people and so forth. I was one of the early organizers there. And I used to do the public relation and the Carnival Journal. And therefore, I decided to create Everybody's Magazine. We launched in 1977, and we are now 2022, and we're still here.
Wow, well done, sir. You reported on some major events.
Basically, given the quality of Everybody's Caribbean Magazine, and we reach a broad range of people like Colin Powell. Long before we heard of the late General Colin Powell, long before he became Chief of Staff, he was the first Black advisor to any president of the United States. That was during the time of Ronald Reagan. So we had readers of that caliber. And this is why at the funeral of Colin Powell, before it was televised, before all the important leaders, it was televised. One of the speakers said that Colin Powell used to listen to Caribbean radio programming in Washington on Saturdays. So sometimes when we read those of us who are in the diaspora playing Caribbean music and we figure, what's this nonsense? There are other people listening. So as a result of all of that, the establishment knew of Everybody's Magazine. So when President Reagan was making that historic trip to Barbados and Jamaica in 1982, obviously, I was part of that White House press. In terms of President Obama, well, that has a lasting effect. I mean, it was the first president. There were millions of people, you know, down in Washington. They're getting the press credentials. I had to make, 2 trips to Washington to go through all the security clearances and everything. But the thing, and if any time I choose or I have the fortune, which I've never asked for, which I think I would get if I'm really sick, to interview the Obamas, the first thing I would ask them is how they felt that particular day. For me, what it still runs into me. That day, it was a sea of humanity, the first inauguration. And there were people in their 90s. A man lost his wife. He could have been in his 90s. And I was asking some of these people, well, why are you here? You could have seen the inauguration in churches, in community buildings, in schools, because they had made it in such a way that you did not have to come to Washington. But here's what really had me. Many of these people said, and these are African Americans from the South, that they lost their loved ones, their siblings, their brother, their parents, their best friend during the civil rights movement, whether it was in the 50s or in the 40s. And therefore, in tribute to these people who lost their life, just sitting in a community room or in the church to watch the inauguration meant nothing. They had to be in Washington. Some took 4 or 5 days by buses to get to Washington. And I think that was what is the lasting moment I will always remember in the first inauguration. I mean, there was a celebration. I mean, I was at 2. There were 9 inauguration boards for the first inauguration. We had press coverage for 2. So I attended 2, and Washington was very, 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 very cold that day. And I mean, the gowns, I sorry, I did not have a cell because the main photographer was at the board. There were women in their gowns at McDonald's because they all came to Washington with gowns and high heels, you know, you ladies.
Wow.
But
truly an historical moment.
You couldn't walk, no vehicles, you had to walk through that cold. And then, you know, so this was a lasting impression. I think apart from the Obama, I would say the Bob Marley funeral. I mean, very, very well. I knew Rita, so I did several interviews. As a matter of fact, Bob had told me before he died, he had cancer in the toe. I didn't believe him, nobody believed him. I did not even use that part in the magazine until he actually passed. But when I attended the funeral at 9 Mile, oh, that day, it was like the mountains of Grenada. It was like Fedor's camp. It was like Belvedere Estate. This was what 9 Mile was. And there was, you know, I thought from quick seconds, I was in the mountains of Grenada. So the Bob Marley funeral. Recently, I found 300 magazines in my garage in Westchester County. And these magazines were produced in 1982 or 1981 when he passed. At that time, there were only 2 magazines that devoted their entire issue on Bob Marley. That was Stones and Everybody's Magazine. So the 300 I found, they're all gone. People are buying them, you know. Of course, the covering of the Grenada invasion or the rest, whatever you call, meant a lot to me because once Morris, you know, was gone, both CBS and ABC had me as a consultant. I was in Trinidad for that special meeting that weekend. And when the invasion or rescue mission started, I was already in Barbados. But, you know, I went into my hotel room in Barbados and wept, knowing what had happened to our beautiful island, especially some of the individuals involved were my good friends. I would friends, but were my friends. As a matter of fact, Morris edited the very second issue of Everybody's Magazine. He helped me edit. his name. I didn't put his name. He was in Brooklyn. He came over to me, just where I'm speaking to you right now at the office. And he helped me edit the second issue of Everybody's Magazine in 1977. And knowing not only he, but some of the opponents who were all friends. So that meant a lot to know what has happened to your beloved island. So this highlights in the journalism career. Yeah.
Wow. You have me sitting here and I'm just soaking all of this up, and I'm like, my goodness, you have seen so much, experienced so much. I admire you, sir. Let's get down to the real business now. What would you say would have been the toughest chapter to put together in this book, Herman?
That's a because none of the chapters were that very difficult, to be honest. First of all, that book was written before the first book came out. So the book that came out was actually the second book. But I updated this book because when I was going to the GBSS, when I was in Form 3 or Form 4, I said, let me start writing about Julian Fedor. I think I wrote about 3 exercise pages or 3 pages handwritten, and that was it. But I've been researching Julian Fedor, but for a long time. And then going back to Father Davis and one of the governors and administrators of Grenada, Talbot, I always felt that documents on Julian Fedor remained in Grenada. But Father Davis, as a teenager now, we used to argue. He's telling me, no, anything you need to know about Julian Fedor is in my book. But he was totally wrong, because almost 90% of what we need to know about Julian Fedor is still in the Grenada Registrar's office. It's decaying, you cannot even touch it. And what we have learned about Julian Fedor in the past was given to us, handed on to us by the British. You know, there is a great African writer, he died, I think about a couple of years back, and he said, the lions never live to tell their side of the story. It is the victors, the person who killed the lion, the hunters, who actually tell the story of the lion, because they have already. So in this case, Julian Fedor, the revolution ended, they had to flee, you know, everyone killed once they hear you associated slaves, especially the slaves and so forth. So you have to piece together or to come up with some comprehensive stuff on Julian Fedor. You know, the privilege, up to now in Grenada, there are high officials in Grenada who informally told me, but it's not in the book, that this man was a criminal. I'm not saying he was not, he did murder the governor, but we never heard the other side of the story. So even in modern day Grenada, people take sides. You are either with or you against Fedor. But again, that is because how it was handed down to us. But when you do all the research and with modern technology, there's a lot of information that we don't know about. Moreover, the few people who wrote about Julian Fedor, they wrote a chapter or two, like the late Prime Minister George Breezen or Professor Beverly Steele. They all wrote about Julian, but it's about a chapter or two in about a history of Grenada, where I think I'm perhaps the only Grenadian who have written a book entirely, 2 books entirely on Julian Fedor. I'm not talking about, there are writers who wrote a book, fictionalizing Julian Fedor. So in that case, I'm kind of given a different perspective. But again, back to the question you asked, which was the chapters I love to do is that the scholars, they have really focused, which is the easy path in doing a PhD, because a lot of people, Black as well as white, have earned a doctorate on Julian Fedor. There's a professor in Chicago, these are white professors I'm talking about, one in Massachusetts, one just last year in Ireland. She wrote her PhD on Julian Fedor about the state of the Roman Catholic Church in colonial Grenada during the time of Fedor, right? But I'm here, I'm looking at it in a different way. So they wrote about the cause of it. I give like the day-to-day. So most people don't know. We hear about the Fedor's Rebellion and we believe, well, it broke out in Guave and it was in the mountains of Grenada. The Fedor's Rebellion was all over Grenada, except the St. George's. The parish of St. George was controlled by Fedor. All the other parishes and Martin was not out. Fedor's second in command was from Petit Martin. People don't, and the battles, you know, Pilot Hill. Have you ever heard of Pilot Hill in Grenville? It's overlooking the market. There are hundreds of were killed in the 16-month period. You have Port Royal or Post Royal. These was battlefields. You talk about places in St. Louis. It was then called Megrin, right? Battle Hill. So the Fedor's Rebellion was not only restricted to the mountains, it was all over Grenada. And these are factors. I mean, and Guave was being conquered and reconquered constantly. So yes. A description of the battles. In the end of it all, we never knew commandos. We hear about commandos, we hear about Palestinian commandos and so. Commandos was always around. So the British hired Dutch commandos and German commandos, believe it or not, to help defeat Julian Fedor. And it took the British 30,000 military people from England to end that revolution. So there is those fascinating descriptive parts in the book that should make the book exciting to the casual reader.
Absolutely. You have me sitting here thinking, wow, wouldn't it be incredible to actually capture visuals, meaning turn this into a documentary or a film in terms of visuals?
I wrote both books with the intent of tomorrow's generation.
Yes.
As you said, will actually do a movie. And the book is in the hand of Hollywood screenwriters.
Excellent.
You have to remember, the Americans are involved. One of the major battles in the American Revolution occurred off Grenada in 1779. Most of all, we don't know. The British put 500 pounds sterling on his head. That 500 pounds sterling is still sitting in the British Treasury. Because Fedor was never caught. We don't know where he is. We don't know whatever happened to him. So that will make it into a very, very nice movie. And as I said, Hollywood screenwriters, they are looking at the book, and I'm not here to say anything is going to happen out of it, but at least it is in the right hands.
But I want you to let people know how they can get their hands on a copy of your latest publication.
We'll be doing launches in Grenville, where the Fedor's Rebellion also broke out, in Labbe, Guave, and at Marshall House in St. George's. But most important, the book is available at in St. George's at the bookstore in Grenadians.
In the mall, correct?
I think it's available at the airport. Yep. There are people who bought books at the airport, the first book. So it's available all over Grenada. And for your listeners worldwide, if you're in England, you get it from Amazon UK, Australia, Amazon Australia, Canada, Amazon Canada. And here in the United States, you don't have to go through Amazon. You could just go to the magazine website, which is www.everybodysmags.com, everybodysmags.com. And then you can order it from there, and you can get it autographed.
Fantastic. Before we wrap up, sir, what is next for you? Because I know you're working on something, and I'm positive you're working on something.
Early 2024, I'm doing a book on Kamala Harris. It's called From Hamilton to Kamala Harris, Alexander Hamilton. Again, what most people didn't know, one of the American founding fathers was from the Caribbean, Alexander Hamilton. He was not from Scotland. He was born in Nevis. So here you have an American founding father, the man who is on your $10 bill, the man who founded the New York Post, the first Secretary of the Treasury, was a man from the Caribbean. He was white, sure enough. And then you take from Marcus Garvey, great leaders. From Grenada, we had the great union leaders, Shirley Chisholm, all of this, Colin Powell. So is that transition from Alexander Hamilton to Kamala Harris? And the book, as a matter of fact, the book is in the making and it will be out before the presidential election of 2024.
Excellent. Thank you, sir, so very much. That was my conversation with Mr. Herman Hall. And if you're really interested in historical facts and, of course, historical figures such as Julian Fedor, pick up a copy of his book today. Stay tuned. We've got some announcements coming your way in a matter of weeks. We've got something super special coming up for Spice Mass 2022. Have a fantastic week ahead. Take good care. Remember to subscribe and like our pages. And thank you for supporting Lexan TV, where it's all about life. Take good care. Bye-bye.